There are 53 inmates on death row in Tennessee. The only woman is 43-year-old Krista Pike.
She was only the second woman to be sentenced to death in the state of Tennessee. At the time, 10 years ago, she was the youngest woman, I believe, on death row in the United States.
Krista does not deserve to die. No one deserves to die.
19-year-old Colleen Slimmer lies motionless on the cold ground. Blood soaks the dirt around her body so brutally mutilated that the man who finds her hesitates, unsure if he is looking at a person or something else. Stepping closer, he sees the truth. Her upper body bears a deep, carved pentagram. Blood and dirt cover her skin. His breath catches. His hands shake. With a pounding heart, he dials the police. What he has discovered will soon shock the nation. Who could be capable of such a brutal act? And why was Colleen targeted? Today, we take a look into the shocking details of this case and the mind behind the crime. Born into chaos. The kind of childhood someone has can shape everything about them. For Krista Pike, life didn't start with much love or stability. She was tossed between people who were supposed to care for her, but none of them really did. And by the time she was old enough to make her own choices, she made one that would shock the country, a choice that put her on death row at just 18 years old. But how did she get there? To understand, we need to go back to the beginning. Krista Gale Pike was born on March 10, 1976, in Beckley, West Virginia, to Carissa Hansen and Emil Glenn Pike. From the very start, life didn't give her much of a chance. Her mother drank while she was pregnant, something doctors later said might have affected Krista's brain development, and things didn't get any better once she was born. Her parents' relationship was a mess. They were married, then divorced, then remarried again. Her mother had been caught cheating, and at one point, even tried to end her own life. Neither parent was fit to raise a child. They were neglectful, absent, and more focused on their own problems. A relative later recalled how Krista, still a baby, crawled around in filth, surrounded by piles of dog waste. When she suffered severe seizures as a toddler, her mother didn't rush to her side. She instead kept partying. Eventually, Krista was sent to live with her grandmother. It seemed like it might be a better situation, but it wasn't. Her grandmother had her own demons. She drank heavily and lived with a man who, according to reports, started abusing Krista at a very young age. There was no protection, no safe place. In 1988, when Krista was just 12, her grandmother passed away. That meant she had to go back to live with her mother. By then, her mother had a job as a nurse, but that didn't make her any more nurturing. She had a new boyfriend, and he was violent. Krista often became the target of his anger. He beat her with a belt, and her mother did nothing to stop it. The mother-daughter bond most people expect never existed. Instead, Krista's mother decided the best way to connect was by smoking marijuana with her. There were no rules, no curfews. Krista wasn't treated like a daughter, she was treated like a friend. And even that word might be too generous. As long as she didn't bother her mother's boyfriend, she was left to do whatever she wanted. Violence wasn't just something Krista endured. Over time, she started dishing it out herself. Her teenage years were chaotic. She fought, she acted out, and no one stepped in to steer her in the right direction. Whenever things got too bad at home, she sometimes stayed with her father. But that wasn't much of an escape. Their relationship was strained, and there was no real stability there either. She had nowhere to turn, and that was just the beginning. The girl who kept falling. Krista Pike never really had a stable place to call home. Every time she thought she had found somewhere to belong, it all came crashing down. And when she stayed with her father's new family, things took a turn that sent her spiraling even further. One of her younger half-sisters accused Krista of abuse, and the accusation was enough for her father to send her away. Krista herself had her own claims of being mistreated over the years, but those around her, friends, family, were skeptical. Many believed she had a habit of making things up. Her mother once described an incident where a man called, threatening to harm her. Pike and a friend didn't wait to find out if he was serious. They grabbed a stick, tracked him down in a parking lot, and attacked. It was the kind of reckless behavior that would define Krista's choices in the years to come. School had once been an escape for Krista, but as her life at home fell apart, so did her education. She switched schools so often that keeping up with lessons became impossible. She had been a bright child, but without stability, her grades plummeted. Eventually, she dropped out altogether, and with no school to keep her occupied, she had even more time to make bad decisions. She started stealing. At first, it was small things. Then, she got caught shoplifting. That arrest led to time in a juvenile detention center, a place meant to scare young offenders straight. But Krista wasn't like most criminals. She wasn't careful, she didn't cover her tracks, and she rarely tried to hide what she did. It was almost as if she wanted to get caught. When she was released, there was a brief moment where it seemed like she might turn things around. She enrolled in Job Corps, a career training program designed to help young people get their lives on track. The program helped students finish high school, learn job skills, and find employment. At 18, Krista had a plan. She wanted to become a nurse, just like her mother. The Job Corps gave her a fresh start, a chance to build something better for herself. But then she met 17-year-old Tatterell Shipp. He was studying culinary arts, and the two of them clicked instantly. Some people are bad for each other, but Krista and Tatterell, they were something else entirely. Their relationship moved fast, too fast, and anyone watching could see that it wasn't just a normal teenage romance. There was an intensity to it, an obsession. And that obsession, it didn't just burn out, it didn't just fade, it led straight to murder. Love, hate, and the occult. Sometimes, all it takes is a rumor to set everything in motion. A few words, repeated enough times, can turn suspicion into certainty, jealousy into rage. And once that happens, there's no turning back. Tatterell Shipp had his own struggles growing up. Raised by a single mother in a rough neighborhood, he saw firsthand what it meant to go without. Money was always tight, and trouble was easy to find. He got involved with gangs, committed crimes, and by 9th grade, school was no longer part of his life. Job Corps was supposed to be his second chance, just like it was for Krista Pike. But instead of focusing on building a better future, he and Krista spent more time making bad decisions together. Krista's closest friend at Job Corps was Shadala Peterson. The two of them connected almost immediately. They shared similar interests, including an obsession with Satanism. People at Job Corps claimed they were into the occult, and Tatterell shared the same fascination. The three of them, Krista, Tatterell, and Shadala, would openly talk about dark rituals. Some students even overheard them mentioning human sacrifice, but no one believed they were serious. It was just talk. At least that's what everyone thought. Then, Colleen Slimmer entered the picture. She was a 19-year-old student from Jacksonville, Florida, studying computer technology at Job Corps. Unlike Krista, she wasn't into the occult. She had her own group of friends, her own life, and no real reason to cross paths with Krista. But that changed when a rumor started making its way through the Job Corps campus. People were saying Colleen had been flirting with Tatterell. Some claimed the two had even been together behind Krista's back. It's impossible to say for sure if any of it was true. Colleen's friends insisted there was no way. Tatterell, on the other hand, would later admit that something had happened between them. Whether it was real or not didn't matter. What mattered was that Krista believed it. And that belief? It would set something terrible in motion. The murder. Some people throw out threats just to vent their anger. They don't mean it, and most of the time, no one takes them seriously. But sometimes, a threat is more than just words. Sometimes, it's a warning. On January 11, 1995, Krista Pike was at Job Corps when she casually told a classmate that she had decided to kill Colleen Slimmer. She didn't make some dramatic declaration or explain why in detail. She just said she felt mean that day. The classmate assumed it was just her being upset about the rumors surrounding her boyfriend. A lot of people had seen how jealous she could get over Tatterell Shipp. It wasn't unusual for her to get angry, to rant, to say things she didn't mean. At least, that's what people thought. But the next day, Krista turned those words into action. She approached Colleen and invited her to hang out that evening. Tatterall and Shadala Peterson would be there too. They planned to go into the woods, smoke some pot, and talk things out, maybe smooth over the tension between them. At least that's how Krista framed it. Colleen agreed. She didn't seem to suspect anything. Before heading out, Krista quietly grabbed a box cutter and a small meat cleaver, tucking them away so no one would notice. That night, the four of them signed out of their dormitory and made their way toward an abandoned steam mill near the University of Tennessee campus. It wasn't far, but it was deep enough in the woods that no one else would be around. No random joggers, no security, no witnesses. As they walked along the dark trail, the trees closed in around them, the sounds of campus life fading into the distance. They were completely alone. That's when Krista turned to Colleen and started accusing her. She demanded to know why she had been trying to sleep with Tatterall. She wanted a confession. Colleen denied it, saying it wasn't true. But Krista wasn't interested in hearing her side. Before Colleen could react, Krista drove her knee into her face, knocking her backward. The sudden attack must have left her in shock because she barely had time to respond before Krista pulled out the meat cleaver and slashed her stomach. That's when Tatterall jumped in. He cut across Colleen's chest, deep enough to leave lasting wounds. Shadala, meanwhile, didn't move to help Colleen. She didn't try to run. She just stood back and watched. She was the lookout. Colleen begged them to stop. She cried, pleaded for her life, but the only response she got was more pain. That's when the box cutter came out. For the next 30 to 40 minutes, Krista and Tatterall tortured her. They didn't stop at one or two wounds. They cut her over and over again, stabbing and slashing her body hundreds of times. At some point, they got bored with just cutting. That's when they decided to mark her permanently. Krista and Tatterall pinned Colleen down, ignoring her weak protests, and carved a pentagram into her chest. She was still alive, still conscious, still feeling every second of it. And then, Krista picked up a chunk of asphalt. Colleen was barely clinging to life, too weak to fight back. Krista didn't hesitate. She lifted the asphalt and brought it down on Colleen's skull. Once, twice, again and again, until her body stopped moving. Finally, after nearly an hour of torture, Colleen Slimmer was dead. But Krista wasn't finished. She crouched down, reached into the open wound on Colleen's head, and carefully removed a small piece of her skull. Then, as if it was nothing, she slipped the blood-covered fragment into her jacket pocket. And she walked away. The killer who couldn't keep quiet. Murderers often fear getting caught. Krista Pike seemed to enjoy the attention. Krista didn't keep what she had done a secret. She talked about it openly, telling people about the attack as if it was just another night out. She even had proof, something she could pull out and show off whenever she wanted. A piece of Colleen Slimmer's skull tucked away in her jacket pocket. At first, no one reported her. Not her friends. Not the people who heard her talk about it. But that didn't matter. The truth has a way of getting out. It didn't take long for the police to find Colleen's body. The brutal nature of the crime made it clear this wasn't random. Someone had wanted her to suffer. Someone had taken their time. The investigation quickly turned toward Krista, Tatterall Shipp, and Shadala Peterson. The logbook at Job Corps made it easy. 4 people signed out that night. Only 3 came back. By January 15, 1995, just 4 days after the murder, police were at Krista's door. They questioned her, searched her belongings, and checked Tatterall's room. That's where they found the Satanic Bible and an altar, reinforcing suspicions that the attack had some kind of ritualistic intent. But the most chilling discovery was in Krista's jacket, the small fragment of Colleen's skull. Once confronted, Krista didn't ask for a lawyer. She didn't try to deny what she had done. She waived her Miranda rights and admitted to everything. She told police she had only wanted Colleen to leave her the hell alone. But the crime scene told a different story. This wasn't a quick attack. It wasn't just a moment of anger. Krista described how Colleen had begged for her life. But instead of stopping, she had done the opposite. The more Colleen pleaded, the more Krista hurt her. Every word, every cry, it only made her want to inflict more pain. She kicked her, cut her, kept going long after Colleen had stopped fighting back. The brutality wasn't just about revenge, it was about control. Within 36 hours, all 3 suspects were in custody: Krista Pike, Tatterall Shipp, Shadala Peterson. But one question remained: did any of them feel remorse? The trial. People facing the death penalty try to show remorse. They beg for mercy. They claim they were out of their mind. Krista Pike? She took a different approach. Her defense attorneys argued that she wasn't in full control of her actions. They said her mental state played a big role in what happened. But when Dr. Eric Engum, a forensic psychologist, took the stand, he painted a different picture. He agreed that Krista had a severe borderline personality disorder, struggled with depression, and had a history of heavy cannabis use. But there was something important missing. She wasn't insane. She had no brain damage. She knew exactly what she was doing. Then there was the Satanism angle. The crime had all the markings of something ritualistic. The pentagram carved into Colleen's chest. The brutal nature of the attack. But Dr. William Burnett, an expert on the subject, dismissed the idea that this was a full-blown satanic killing. He believed it was more about teenagers dabbling in the occult and acting on aggression rather than an actual sacrifice. Her legal team tried another route. They brought in family members to talk about Krista's rough upbringing, hoping it would make the jury see her in a different light. But it wasn't enough. The jury didn't buy it. Initially, Dr. Diana McCoy was supposed to testify in Krista's defense, offering more evidence of her diminished capacity. But at the last minute, her testimony was scrapped. Without it, Krista's defense had little left to stand on. The verdicts came fast. Tatterall Shipp, Krista's boyfriend and accomplice, was found guilty of murder. Because of his age, he was only 17 at the time, he was sentenced to life in prison with a chance of parole after 25 years. Shadala Peterson, who had acted as the lookout, decided to cooperate with prosecutors. In exchange for her testimony, she got off relatively easy. She pleaded guilty to being an accessory after the fact and was sentenced to probation. Then there was Krista. After just 2.5 hours of deliberation, the jury returned with its decision. Guilty of capital murder. Guilty of conspiracy to commit murder. On March 30th, 1996, Krista Pike was sentenced to death by electrocution. A few months later, on June 6, 1996, she received an additional 25-year sentence for the conspiracy charge. That should have been the end of the story. A conviction. A death sentence. Case closed. But Krista Pike wasn't done making headlines. The devil never sleeps. Most inmates on death row spend their time quietly, avoiding trouble and hoping for an appeal. Krista Pike wasn't one of them. From the moment she was locked up, chaos followed her. Even after being sentenced to die, she never showed an ounce of remorse for what she did to Colleen Slimmer. In fact, just days after receiving the death penalty, she wrote a letter to Tatterall Shipp, her boyfriend and accomplice in the murder. When that letter was later read aloud in court, it sent chills down the spines of everyone in the room. In the letter, Krista told Tatterall she missed him. Then, with no sense of guilt, she brought up Colleen's murder. She said she had been nice by making sure Colleen died quickly instead of letting her suffer longer. And now, she complained, the state was going to execute her for it. She ended the letter by promising her loyalty to Shipp, signing off as Lil Devil. This wasn't someone who regretted what she had done. This was someone who still enjoyed talking about it. After her conviction, Krista couldn't seem to decide what she wanted. She filed an appeal, then dropped it. In 2001, she told the court she wanted to die and asked to be executed as soon as possible. A judge granted her request, setting her execution date for August 19, 2002. But just weeks before that day arrived, Krista changed her mind. On July 8, 2002, her defense team tried to reinstate her appeal. The request was denied, but then, on August 2nd, an appeals panel overturned that decision. Krista's execution was put on hold. For a while, things were quiet. But Krista Pike wasn't the kind of person to stay out of trouble for long. By 2004, she was making headlines again, this time for a violent attack inside the prison. The target was another inmate, Patricia Jones. For reasons that were never fully explained, Krista decided she wanted her dead. And when Krista Pike wanted something, she acted on it. One day, when the opportunity presented itself, Krista went for it. She wrapped a shoestring around Jones's neck and pulled with all her strength, trying to strangle her. Jones fought back, but Krista had the advantage. The struggle lasted for several terrifying moments before Jones finally collapsed. By the time guards arrived, she was already unconscious on the ground. Her body twitched. Foam gathered at her mouth. Her eyes bulged as if they might pop out of her skull. And Pike? She was proud of what she had done. A few days later, she called her mother and bragged about the attack. Laughing, she described in detail how Jones's body had reacted, how lifeless she had looked. There wasn't a trace of guilt in her voice. She sounded amused, almost excited. Authorities believed she hadn't acted alone. Another inmate, Natasha Cornett, was suspected of being involved. Cornett was already serving 3 life sentences for her role in a brutal murder. She and a group of teenagers had slaughtered a couple and their 6-year-old son in what was believed to be a satanic ritual. But despite the suspicions, there wasn't enough evidence to charge her. Krista, on the other hand, wasn't so lucky. For the attack on Patricia Jones, she was convicted of attempted first-degree murder. Another conviction. Another reason for her to stay behind bars. By 2008, her legal options were running out. She had exhausted nearly all of her appeals. She made one last attempt at getting a new trial, but the request was denied. That meant one thing: her execution was still on the table. But Krista Pike wasn't finished making headlines. She had one more trick up her sleeve, and this time, it wasn't just about causing chaos inside the prison. This time, she had her sights set on something much bigger: the escape attempt. Krista Pike had already taken a life, but now she was focused on reclaiming her own by breaking out of prison. By March 2012, authorities uncovered an escape plot that sounded like something out of a movie. It involved a corrections officer, a man from New Jersey, and a plan that, if successful, could have put Pike back on the streets. It wasn't clear exactly how it all started, but investigators later learned that Pike had been writing letters to a man named Donald Kohut since early 2011. Kohut, a personal trainer in his early 30s, lived in Flemington, New Jersey, nearly 850 miles away from the Tennessee prison where Krista was held. At first, it seemed like nothing more than a pen-pal relationship. But by July of that year, Kohut was making the long drive to Nashville, visiting Krista once or twice a month. Somewhere along the way, those visits turned into something much more dangerous. Kohut became obsessed with Krista, so much so that he was willing to risk everything to help her escape. He started coming up with a plan, a way to break her out of one of the most secure prisons in Tennessee, but he couldn't do it alone. He needed someone on the inside. That's where Justin Heflin came in. Heflin was a corrections officer at the prison. He wasn't rich and he wasn't powerful, but what he did have was access. If Krista was going to escape, she needed someone like him. Kohut reached out, offering cash and gifts in exchange for Heflin's help, and Heflin, whether out of greed or desperation, agreed. The plan wasn't complicated, but it was risky. A prison key would be traced, copied, and then used to get Krista out. They had to be careful. One mistake, and the entire scheme would fall apart. But they weren't as careful as they thought. In early 2012, someone tipped off prison officials. Authorities started digging, and it didn't take long for them to realize what was happening. Suddenly, Krista's escape plan wasn't a secret anymore. The Tennessee Department of Corrections, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, TBI, and the New Jersey State Police all got involved. They worked together to shut the plan down before it could go any further. According to the TBI, the escape wasn't about to happen just yet. It was still in the early stages. But if they hadn't stopped it when they did, it might have been a different story. In March 2012, Kohut was arrested. He was charged with bribery and conspiracy to commit escape. Heflin was arrested too, facing charges of bribery, official misconduct, and conspiracy. But what about Krista? Despite being the one who stood to gain the most from the escape, she wasn't charged. Investigators weren't sure how deeply she was involved. Did she help plan it? Or was she just sitting back, waiting to see if it would work? Either way, she wasn't going anywhere. She remained on death row, right where she had been for years. The men who tried to help her weren't as lucky. On May 31st, 2012, Donald Kohut was sentenced to 7 years in prison. He was sent to the Tennessee State Northeast Correctional Complex. Heflin, on the other hand, cooperated with investigators. Because of that, he avoided prison time, but he lost his job with the Tennessee Department of Corrections. With the escape attempt shut down, Krista had no choice but to stay where she was. Too late for redemption. For years, the question wasn't if Krista Pike would be executed, but when. On August 27, 2020, Tennessee Attorney General Herbert Slattery's office formally asked the state Supreme Court to set an execution date for Krista. But the world was in chaos. The COVID-19 pandemic had shut down courtrooms, delayed trials, and put legal proceedings on hold. Krista's attorneys took advantage of the situation, requesting more time to argue against her execution. The state did not challenge these extensions, and for a while, her fate remained in limbo. Then, in June 2021, her legal team made another move. They filed a motion opposing her execution and requested a certificate of commutation, a last-ditch effort to have her sentence reduced. The court wasn't convinced. The request was denied. By late 2022, Krista had exhausted every legal option. There was nowhere left to turn. But then, something unexpected happened. In November of that year, Tennessee's Supreme Court made a groundbreaking decision. They ruled that juveniles sentenced to life without parole were being punished unconstitutionally. It was a decision that changed the future for many young offenders. And Krista's lawyers saw an opportunity. In August 2023, they used that ruling to try and reopen her case. They argued that Krista was only 18 when she committed the murder. They pointed to her unstable mental state at the time. If the courts believe that juveniles deserve a second chance, why shouldn't Krista be given the same consideration? But the court shut it down. In October 2023, Judge Scott Green made it clear that the ruling didn't apply to Krista. It was meant for juveniles. Krista, he emphasized, was legally an adult at the time of the crime. The law wasn't on her side. As of May 21, 2024, Tennessee has yet to set an execution date. But when they do, Krista Pike will make history, for all the wrong reasons. If the state follows through, she will be the first woman executed in Tennessee in nearly 200 years. For the family of Colleen Slimmer, the case has dragged on far longer than they ever expected. They have spent decades waiting for justice. Whether that final decision comes soon or drags on for years, one thing is certain: Krista's fate is sealed. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.